everyone. I'm sorry I've been so late for chapter 3, but here it is. I'm gonna go as fast as I can. So chapter 3 just continues with the same explanation of the dualism on personhood theory. And before I get into all the details of what, things that really got my attention, I think at the end when they began talking about, harvesting organs and harvesting just all the research that is happening. Like, I had no idea. I mean, I guess I knew, it's obvious, right? How do they have all this knowledge and all these experiments and there's the scientists going on, but I don't know. I just never made the connection that scientists in the lab actually do fertilize the eggs, and they basically create human beings to continue just studying the developing of a baby in the woman, all that. So that, like, I guess once I realized that's what's happening, I think I posted something on Facebook about how now this scientific community, I think there's like 15 days or something that they have a limit until they discard the embryos. But I think now they're willing to drop that kind of law or rule that they have, and they're gonna continue. They're gonna allow for the baby to keep on developing outside of the womb as long as possible. So that was kind of sad. Anyway, so what was weird about in page 85 about euthanasia bans and how Holland already has some of those. So basically the same way as we saw in chapter 2, how the same argument that goes for abortion, it is also happening into euthanasia. And how, if it's just if we are just merely a body, and if you're old enough that you basically have done all that you can do now, just basically you're just stealing oxygen from other people, right? And I think that made me think about power of attorney and all of those things that I have done with Emerson. But I think it made me kind of like being able to explain to him. And it was kind of joking, but no joking. The other day we were talking with Katie at church, and I said, you know what, like, you need to fulfill your covenant vows, because like if I'm dead, right, but not really dead, like if I'm like in a coma and I can still breathe on my own, and the only thing that you have to do is to continue feeding me, then I don't want you to starve me to death like they did in this other case. I think they talked about it in chapter 2. I'm like, you fulfill, because I used to think, like and I was a Christian when we did that power of attorney and all of that. We were Christians. It's just like, I think I never read any of this, and I kind of like made the connection. Yes, I have a soul. Of course, I have a soul, but that's just not human, right? Like, just unplug me. I don't wanna be a burden on you or anything. But now that I'm thinking more and more about these things, the way the author of the book explains it, I'm like, no, like I have no right to end my life. Like, I have no right. Number one, not even to give my husband the power, right? Because I can say, well, it's my body, right? I don't want to be a burden. Just kill me, unplug me, let me die. But that's just wrong. Like, now, that's exactly what I like about page 86, that she says, I think there's like a doctor, I don't even know how to pronounce his name, Howard was, says, there is a distinction between putting to death and letting die. So I think it was very clear to tell Emerson, you can let me die. Like, if you unplug me from everything and my brain gives up, or my heart gives up, or my lungs give up, and I cannot continue breathing on my own, then fine, do that. But don't starve me to death. Like, don't kill me. So what else? Oh, there was this guy who was a supporter of Darwinism, who actually favored infanticide. And he was urging people to actually chloroform unfit children. Just basically show them the same mercy that is shown to beasts that are no longer fit to live, right? Basically on, like if you don't have consciousness, or if you don't have, you know, if you cannot just do, if you're not, yeah, you have not cognitive abilities and all of that. So in 1968, I was like surprised that the Harvard criteria for establishing when a patient has died, and all the thing that, you know, it just has nothing to do whether you can no longer breathe or your cells die, but actually when you suffer a loss of personhood. But again, that's the same circle, right? So what constitutes a person? Like, just because I am eating through a tube and I cannot do it on my own, or in a way care for myself, does that mean I am less of a person than I was when I was able to feed myself? So basically, doctors are not making medical judgments anymore, but rather they are making moral judgments about who deserves to live and who deserves to die. So that's, you know, kind of messed up, especially when cancer drugs, like all the implications, right? Because like if a cancer patient has no money, or if the family has no money, or if the children do not want to pay for the cancer treatment of the elderly parents or something like that, like it is cheaper to basically kill you than to pay for your cancer treatment, right? I mean, we're talking about $35 versus $6,000 and stuff like that. So in page 92, she says that it's just like a very sad case about how a woman named Evelyn begged the family not to decide to, you know, disconnect the just pull the plug, right? Pull the plug on the machines. But I mean, I understand, you know, the biblical worldview, she says that a disabled person is just that, a disabled person, right? Your body and soul. And so euthanasia advocates are essentially saying that our personhood consists solely in the higher mental functions. And that has been, I think that's just one of my fears. And actually, I mean, I would have to confess it's a very sinful sin. Because like every time since I have gotten pregnant, like the very first thing that I think is, what if my baby has a disability, right? What if? And I'm just, this book has been so convicting, because obviously I have always said, well, that's why Emerson and I, since I got pregnant with Libby, they always offered us the genetic testing, and we have never taken those, because I mean, what's the point? That's what we think anyways, right? What's the point? It's not like we're going to decide, yeah, let's just abort the baby, right? He has a disability. But I think now reading this, it has been more and more convicting to know that if I have a child with a severe mental disability or physical disability, it is strengthened me in my faith, and in putting away those sinful thoughts, right? Like to make it obedient to Christ, to make them obedient to Christ, like take captive those thoughts, like the scripture says, and saying, well, and even if I were to have a child with a disability, so what? Like, is he not a person? Like, am I not gonna love him as much as I love the other three, just because the other three say, you know, can talk? And what if this guy doesn't talk, or stuff like that? You know what I mean? In Christian thinking, she says in page 93, you will still be you, a unique and wonderful person known and loved by God. And one of the questions in the catechism is that I ask them, you know, when we're teaching them how God created Adam and Eve, like from the dust, then Eve from the rib, right? And then what else did God make them with? And then the answer is, well, he he gave them a soul that would never die. And so that, I think all these things, especially with babies, like the babies that are frozen, like when you think about, like I was reading, I think it's page, I don't think I have it here. Where are the embryos? I don't know. I think it's page 113. No. Well, I think she just gave a number, but I just don't remember what the number is. I was just reading, actually. I just clicked on an article online about snowflake babies. I didn't know that was the name. A snowflake baby is a baby who is born after being frozen for years. And so I was just reading that, you know, when somebody goes through in vitro, like they harvest like sometimes up to 20 eggs from the woman, and they fertilize them all, and say they implant 4, and say 2 take, so she has twins, the other 2 die. But now you have 16 babies, like potential babies. Well, not potential babies. You have 16 babies frozen. And I was just like, so like, I don't even know, like sad, angry, upset, and just thinking, why? Like, why is this happening? Why would God allow something like that to happen? Where obviously he ordained that this would happen, that's the reason it's happening. And at the same time, it is not his will that's happening, that should happen. Which I would agree. I mean, I'm sure you would agree with that, right? Like the two wills of God, right? The will of command, like the will of, what's the name? The will of, is it the will of command? No, the will of command. Like Revelation, right? The 10 Commandments versus the will of decree, which is you shall not murder, but then the murder of Jesus happens, right? Like he ordained that they would kill Jesus. And so those coexist, and those are, both of them are biblical. And so like when I'm putting all these together, I'm like, well, this is something that he's using and there is a purpose, but it just mind-boggling. Like, why would this happen, right? When there are like probably thousands of babies. Because then you, like, they call you, right? Like, okay, so you already had your twins. What are you gonna do with the other 16 children that we have here stored for you? And people just walk away from that, and they are just basically abandoned. Anyways, so as she goes harvesting humans, you know, she goes into embryo research, and how basically it involves creating human life with direct intention of destroying it. It can, the next step that this moves into is obviously the sale of fetal organs, right? And this is like almost, well, not almost, like this is evil, just like the evil of the human heart, because it says, someday, if we are fortunate, she's quoting somebody, a bioethicist, Jacob Apple. He says, someday, if we are fortunate, scientific research may make possible farms of artificial wombs breeding fetuses for their organs. That's just like, that's evil. Just like imagining that happening. Like, and this is silly, but this is just sometimes how my mind works, right? Like imagine like Star Wars when they're like breeding all of those like clones, right? But these are machines. So now I can only imagine like a chamber with alive babies that you're just breeding them, you're just growing them so that you can kill them and take the organ that you need for transplants or something like that. And then I guess you could argue, well, you know, that life is going to save this other life because this other baby needs a heart transplant. But I don't think it's justifiable. Like, you cannot just create a life because you're playing God and then kill it to save another one. Like, that's just not, I don't think that's how any of this works or should work. then post-human future and genetic improvements and all of that, and how parents might be even empowered by the technology to choose the genetic traits of your own children. And this again, like this is like sci-fi, like when science sections goes like rogue, right? Because he says that Google's director of engineering hopes that advances in artificial intelligence will enable us to download the brain to a computer. So even if you die, if you physically die, your brain will still, all the information that your brain has, so like you will basically be alive, even though your body is dead. That's just like, anyway, oh, page 99, then somebody was arguing that maybe in the future, chimpanzees genetically, I mean, we can make chimpanzees look more and more like humans, you know, like using DNA, human DNA, to give them intellectual human capacities, because not only that, because that would be good for chimps, but because it would prove that chimpanzees deserve legal status as persons. So now we're declaring that a monkey is a human, right? Like a human, like a monkey is a person. And it's just all messed up. However, I do appreciate that she makes a distinction in page 100, that when the plan of God is respected, genetic research can actually be a tool for great good, right? It's a way in which man exercises dominion and subdue the earth by discovering nature's laws and developing its potential. So if genetical research can happen so that maybe a gene can get modified and then you don't die of cancer, I think that's great. It's just how that research happens. And again, it just made me, I think I just put an asterisk somewhere, like Tower of Babel. It made me think about the Tower of Babel. So how I think we're playing, like it's just very likely, you know, the human heart is deceitful and it just always goes wrong, right? Most of the times. Anyways, how we love pets more. I don't know why I just wrote that, but because of Darwin, obviously in page 102, she says that many people no longer have a moral basis for universal rights. And so animal rights activists say that they want to elevate animal rights to the same level as human rights. And obviously they are sincere. And actually, so the life of a newborn baby is of less value to it than the life of a pig, a dog, or a chimpanzee. And this was, I think, in Colorado, like there was a voting recently. I mean, recently, I don't know, like maybe a year ago or something like that, where I think I read it, where like they voted for animal rights to protect the baby bears or something like that, versus banning abortion after 22 weeks. And everybody voted no for protecting a baby, and everybody voted for protecting the bear. So anyways, I really enjoy how he explains, you know, that Christianity was the very first one who actually lifted children, and how Jesus actually said, when the people were bringing the children, he said, "Let the little children come to me." And so it was the church actually who persuaded eventually parents in the Roman Empire who did not want to have their children to give them at the church door instead, and that was what created orphanages. So I think that was good. And obviously then she starts talking about the crucifixion and how it was considered barbaric. So Christians are forbidden to show favoritism, and I don't remember why she's talking about this in here, but Christians began to proclaim the radical message that basic human rights do not depend on status or power or stage of life. So then she talks about in page 107 about how these practices, right, all these allowing to commit suicide, right, which is euthanasia and all that stuff, these practices will most likely be imposed in the name of reducing suffering and enhancing choice under the heading of bioethics. So it's not like they're gonna be telling you, oh, hey, here's the medicine so that you kill yourself, right? No, they're gonna sell it to you, the narrative that scientists and that even the culture is going to drive this with is a compassionate approach on how you can end suffering, right? But this is exactly, it's just, and this reminded me of Ali Beth Stuckey because she's always saying that, like progressives, right, and liberals always, like whoever controls the language, like controls like the culture and the narrative and all of that. And it's true because, you know, like they don't say abortion, they don't say murder, right? They say reproductive rights. And obviously you want to have like you have to have rights, right? Like you want your rights to be protected, but like the moment you are pregnant, and I think I heard Summer White or Jaeger and Theologian saying this the other day, like once you're pregnant, you already reproduced, right? So there's nothing like, yeah, reproductive rights, that's the way they're presenting it. Anyways, what else? Ella in 110, that's awesome. There's this girl, Ella, who she's a wheelchair hero, and actually Google her on YouTube, and she wrote a letter. Dear Hollywood, why do you want me dead? I haven't read the whole thing, but basically she's a Christian. She says, you may not believe in God, but I do. And because of that, I believe in the value of all people. So basically, Ella has realized that disabled people know that they're the prime targets of the death movement. And so she confronted them. Because I think the girl can do, I don't know how many tricks on her wheelchair. And then she talks about the adoption of snowflake babies and how a lot of people, 43% of patients that they thought they were like in a vegetative state, actually were diagnosed, they were misdiagnosed. And then she talks about, you know, how in vitro fertilization, just the process, and how she knows a friend that went through this process, and that she collected enough embryos, but that she didn't discard them. She actually gave them to another couple who could not have babies. And so those babies were, you know, that family had their family that way. And then there are the advantages of embryo adoption because it's more cheaper than ordinary adoption. But even in the clinic, when you have to sign paperwork and all of these things, embryo adoption, they don't say the adoption of a baby or the adoption of an embryo, they say tissue transplant. You know, like this is, instead of being frozen or something, it's cryopreserved specimen intended to achieve a pregnancy, right? I mean, what could possibly achieve pregnancy unless you have a living human embryo? So I think there's just companies or whatever, they're just trying to protect themselves. And obviously, at the end of the chapter, she says that in page 115, she says that just in Holland, in 2015, a doctor was sued for refusing to sign off on a request by a patient for the drugs to commit suicide, and how in 2016 in Belgium, a Catholic nursing home was sued for refusing to allow a doctor to give a woman a lethal injection on church-run premises. So in the culture of death, no dissent is allowed. And I think chapter 4 is gonna be talking about hookup culture and I'm assuming on campus. So anyways, I hope that was helpful. Sorry again for the delay, but I'm gonna try to reach chapter 4. Bye.